worst mineshaft deaths ever.
Horrible deaths. And ladies and boxheads, first up is the Levant mine disaster, where a mineshaft accident sent over 30 men plunging hundreds of feet to their deaths. Yeah, if you're claustrophobic, good luck with this video. Anyways, it's October 20th, 1919 at the Levant mine, also known as the Mine Under the Sea, located in Cornwall, England. The greatest depth of the Levant mine reached all the way down to 2,000 feet below the surface. And if you were wondering, you could fit 2 whole-ass Eiffel Towers down there. And it had tunnels that stretched over a mile underneath the Atlantic Ocean. If you couldn't tell already, that's pretty damn big. And a mine of this size required hundreds of men to work there, extracting and processing ore with 50 to 60 men constantly underground, working in each 8-hour shifts. But the conditions down there for these workers were, well, completely terrible. Yeah, it's not as easy as Minecraft makes it out to be. To start, the tunnels were insanely hot, reaching a consistent temperature of 92 degrees Fahrenheit. Now imagine swinging a pickaxe in that heat for 8 straight hours. Safe to say these guys were sweating bullets the whole shift. The tunnels themselves were incredibly long and narrow, only 7 feet tall and 3 to 4 feet wide. So yeah, 6'5" guys like me could barely fit in there. Not to mention it was completely pitch black in the mine. Keep in mind this is the 1800s, they didn't really have headlamps just yet. Miners would have to use clay to stick candles on top of their helmets, just to even get the smallest source of light. And a lot of the time the candles would just blow out. That's definitely annoying. I can't wait to go home and eat some beans on toast. Ah, that's my hand, you idiot. Once these guys finished up their excruciating 8-hour-long shifts of hard labor, they would then have to climb 80 ladders from the bottom to reach the surface. It usually took well over an hour to climb all the way up, and best believe they did not get paid for their climbs. But yeah, having these exhausted workers climb 80 ladders after their shift was just a recipe for disaster. Some men couldn't even complete the climb and fell, resulting in numerous injuries. It really wasn't ideal at all. But thankfully, a substitute for the ladders was implemented in 1857 at the Levant mine. Ladies and boxheads, meet the Man Engine, a steam-powered lift system that greatly improved the conditions at the Mine Under the Sea, but was also the direct cause of over 30 men plunging to their deaths painfully. We'll get into that in a second. This Man Engine cut the time needed to return to the surface in half. Instead of over an hour, now it only took about 30 minutes. Whew, saving me some time. A 1,000-foot wooden pole was inserted in the mine shaft. On this pole, there was a small platform every 12 feet, along with a handlebar for the workers to hold on to. On the surface lies the actual steam-powered engine that would rise the rod 12 feet, then lower it back down. Listen to how this Man Engine thing actually works, it'll be important later, trust me. So, the workers would step onto the platform, they would be lifted 12 feet up, then they would step off of the moving platform and onto a wall platform. Then they would wait for the next platform to come down. They step onto it and are lifted another 12 feet, they step off the moving platform and onto the wall platform. Repeat for 30 minutes until the surface is reached. This new lift system was pretty damn awesome, at least compared to the ladders they had before. The Man Engine was so awesome in fact that it was used in the Levant mine for another 62 years after, well, it was implemented, until October 20th, 1919. At this point, the Man Engine was outdated and completely worn down from its use over the years. Workers were always on it and the parts constantly had to be replaced. It was pretty much a ticking time bomb, a disaster waiting to happen. Around 3 p.m. that day, the morning crew was finishing up their shift. Exhausted and sweating, they pack up their tools and gear. Ready to finally head home for the day. Maybe even crack open a beer. Anyways, they make their way out of the hot tunnels to the wooden pole in the middle of the mine shaft. One by one, the workers step onto the platforms just as they do at the beginning and end of each of their shifts. Like you would imagine, they weren't really thinking much of it. The Man Engine wobbles and creaks as more and more workers step on. Slowly but surely, they're lifted closer and closer to the surface. Man, when are they gonna replace this thing? My buddy in London's got an elevator at his mine shaft. Wait, what the? Suddenly, the 1,000-foot wooden rod begins to crash and tumble down the mine shaft. The platforms, along with the workers on top of them, follow along, plummeting and crashing down the hole. The candles at the top of the workers' helmets blow out at the sudden movement, leaving them in complete darkness as they fall. The men are screaming out of fear as they disappear into the pitch black abyss below. The 1,000-foot rod hits the walls and splits into multiple pieces, as it rapidly falls down the shaft, leaving a 300-foot piece to continue plunging downward. The men on the platforms either try jumping to the ledges of the tunnels or clinging onto the rod for dear damn life as they brace for impact. At the bottom of the mine, the men are still in the tunnels, and when they begin to hear a distant rumble, they take a look to the middle of the shaft. They look up to see something terrifying. A massive avalanche of stone, wood, and metal is rapidly plunging down the shaft. The sudden descent caused the rod to crash through the shaft's infrastructure, destroying platforms, ladders, and sending debris hurtling downwards. The men at the bottom quickly jump out of the way as the walls violently shake, running back into the tunnels on the side of the shaft and away from the impending danger. "Move, move!" they shouted at each other. It isn't until the rod pierces a shaft wall about 300 feet below the initial split that it finally comes to a stop. It buckled and lodged itself into this wall, blocking tunnel entrances and trapping some unfortunate workers inside. Then the mine shaft falls eerily quiet. The loud and abrupt chaos that just ensued comes to a sudden stop and everything is dead silent. But it's not long before the screams and groans of the injured men fill the shaft. In the complete darkness, the men have become stuck under the destruction. From hundreds of feet below the surface, the trapped men are shouting their cries for help, unable to move below the rubble. I seriously can't even imagine the absolute terror these men must have felt. Most had just fallen hundreds of feet into the total darkness only to be injured, unable to move, and unaware if anyone could even hear them scream. But at least they were alive, right? Because those who were still breathing were the lucky ones. While the exact number was unknown, at least 20 men had been killed as a result of the rod's fall, or being struck by the debris. And unfortunately, that number of fatalities was about to grow. With well over 150 men trapped hundreds of feet underground, the rescue effort was about to be incredibly difficult. But thankfully, not all of the men down there were unable to move. Once the dust settled, a group of about 100 men relit the candles on their helmets and they regrouped. They searched around for any injured men who weren't stuck under debris. From there, they picked up the wounded and together they desperately searched for an exit. Unfortunately, they couldn't just go up. The shaft had been blocked off from the destruction of the wooden beam. Instead, these men had to climb up the emergency ladders of the water pumping shaft and the skip shaft, where the ores were transported up to the surface. For 2 hours, these exhausted and injured yet determined men would climb these emergency ladders for hundreds of feet until they reached the surface. It was a damn miracle when they stepped out into the fresh air. No one on the surface was expecting to see them so soon after the brutal accident that just occurred. But still, their long and disastrous day wasn't over just yet. Even though most of these men had just worked a tough 8-hour shift, then had near-death experiences, then climbed ladders for 2 hours, they still wanted to go back down and save their helpless coworkers, who were trapped under the rubble in the mine. These guys were seriously brave, man. So a rescue team of the surviving victims, other mine workers, friends, and family members formed. And over the next 3 days, efforts were made to try and save the other 50 trapped men. From under the rubble, the groans and cries of the victims were heard as the rescuers slowly removed the debris. It would take lots of digging, winching, and crawling into small spaces for these guys to be set free. Another reminder, it's the early 1900s, so they had to make do with the technology they had. It was a slow, risky process to dig these guys out of the rubble. But ladies and boxheads, unfortunately not all of these poor men could be saved in time. Some of their desperate groans and calls for help turned to silence over the 3 days of rescuing. And by the time the rescue efforts concluded, the death toll rose to 31. 31 unlucky guys who just wanted to go home to their families after a long, crappy shift at the mine. But hold on, how did this whole situation even happen in the first place? How did the man engine cause all these deaths? Well, it all comes down to one part of the man engine. A metal bracket on top of the rod that hadn't been replaced for 5 whole years. While all the workers were on the platforms, that single metal bracket snapped, sending the wooden rod and all the people on it plummeting down into the shaft. This is the part that makes me mad. The whole thing was ruled an accident because apparently the metal bracket was improperly made. Me personally, I think this was a case of mine owners being cheap and neglecting their equipment. Seriously, an accident? Come on. Next up is the Snæfell mine disaster, where a group of workers enter a mine only for an invisible force to kill them off. May 10th, 1897, on the Isle of Man, a small country located between Great Britain and Ireland. The Snæfell mine was a zinc mine situated on the slopes of the Snæfell mountain. At the time, the mine reached a depth of just one Eiffel Tower, 1,026 feet, otherwise known as 171 fathoms. And for my slower box heads out there, it's just intervals of 6 feet that are used for measuring depth. And this mine just had one entrance or exit, and that was the Mineshaft entrance. Yep, one way out of a 1,000 foot deep mine. Nothing could possibly go wrong with that, right? Anyways, on this specific morning in 1897, 34 miners were preparing to enter the mine as a part of their routine shift, with a few other men working their shift outside of the actual mine shaft. They grabbed their gear, rounded everyone up, and began to head down through the mine entrance. Each miner had a designated level for their shift, but first they needed to climb down pretty far to reach those levels. Each level had a ladder fit snug in between a small, narrow hole. I don't even know how they put it in the hole. Usually it's difficult for me too. Just about the size of a washing machine door for anyone that was curious. The tunnels themselves were pretty small too, ranging from 8 feet to just 40 inches wide. So yeah, the men could only descend the ladder just one at a time. This doesn't seem too safe if they're
For a good look, if you're trying to build like inside a little mine or something, I don't recommend it, but you need at least 2. The fact that he said it was only 1 entrance. What if rocks pile the first entrance and they block it off completely? Y'all are now submerged inside a cave. So you need at least 2. So if that one was to happen, like an earthquake happened, all the rocks blocked off the first entrance, you could easily go through the back entrance. I feel like you need 4 to be safe. I feel like north, east, south, west, but at least 2. I feel like.
there happened to be an emergency or anything, right? Subtle foreshadowing. Anyways, the men are climbing down the ladder.
I feel like you need at least 2 exits. That's what I'm saying. I feel like you need at least 2 exits. Because like if earthquake come or something, it block out the first exit. You need like something to get out. So you need at least 2, maybe 4. But I feel like you need at least 2. So 1 block off, you can get off in the next one.
And everything is just fine. The men passed the first level with no issues, which was 15 fathoms deep. Fine, I'll do the math for you. That means it's 90 feet down. They continue climbing and eventually reach 40 fathoms down. Again, everything is fine. All these guys are probably thinking about is how they just want to get their shift over with and go home. After all, mine jobs are known to be super fun. Levant mine. So, the men continue climbing down the ladder one by one, until they reach 60 fathoms down, or about 360 feet in depth. And this is where things start to go terribly wrong. As they're climbing, the men start feeling kinda off. Their bodies suddenly feel weak, especially the men who were the farthest down on the ladder. They start to feel these effects the most intensely. Mate, I reckon I could do with the kip right now. Hey, same here, mate. Uh-oh, that can't possibly be a good sign. Some of the men at the bottom of the ladder are falling unconscious, suddenly losing all control of their bodies. Knowing that something is totally wrong in the shaft, a few of the men quickly start to retreat back up. At least the men who could still climb. Fighting off the drowsiness and weakness that their bodies are experiencing, the men ascend the ladder, climbing as fast as they possibly can to return to the surface and call for help. One by one, the men resurface and are finally met with the outside air. The first few miners to resurface seem to be fine, the effects slowly wearing off as they breathe in the fresh air. However, the effects are clearly getting worse and more intense with each man that returns from the shaft, with the last few even falling unconscious as soon as they reach safety, and most of the men not even making it out of the mine at all. Thankfully, the mine captain John Cooley was present outside of the shaft. Working from the exterior, he saw the men struggling to resurface and immediately took action. Go get Laxey, send some help, god damn it! He quickly ordered the less affected workers to go notify the nearby Laxey mine, which was less than 3 miles away. Captain Cooley knew that they were about to need as much help as they could possibly get. And Cooley wasn't about to just let most of his men sit down there in the dangerous mine any longer. No, that would be way too risky. They don't know what the hell's going on down there, but it's evident that those men need to get out, and they need to get out now. So Captain Cooley rushes towards the entrance of the mine himself and begins to make his way down the ladder. Breathing heavily, he's concerned for his workers, hoping that whatever's going on isn't as serious as it seems. If you couldn't tell already, miners have a no guy left behind kind of mindset. These dudes all work the same shitty jobs, so they were pretty much in it together. Anyways, Cooley is descending the ladder as fast as he can. He reaches 15 fathoms, then 40 fathoms, then 60 fathoms. Here is where he sees his men, but none of them are conscious. Cooley is relieved to see that his men are still breathing, but he knows that that won't last if they're down there much longer. But what is he even supposed to do in this situation? He can't just carry them up the ladder his damn self. The hole is narrow enough just for one dude to fit, but two? Yeah, that's simply not possible. The only option is that Captain Cooley has to wait for help from the Laxey mine. Within 2 hours of sending the men for help, they return to the Snaefell mine with over 40 volunteers and gear to help remove the unconscious men from the shaft. Ladies and boxheads, time is really ticking. The longer that those men are down there, the closer they are to seriously dying. Meanwhile, in the mine, the echoes of approaching footsteps on the ladders above sent a wave of relief to Captain Cooley. The rescue team from the Laxey mine had arrived in the shaft, immediately getting right to business. They were going to save those men. How? Well, with something they called the box. It was a tube-shaped vessel big enough to fit one of the unconscious men inside, yet narrow enough to be lifted through the levels. They attached the box to the end of a winch and were able to slowly reel the tube out of the shaft. But this wasn't nearly as easy as it sounds. Despite their best efforts, the rescue process was painstakingly slow. Okay, so each trip down required time to secure an unconscious miner into the box, ensure the winch was safely operated, and hoist the man up the deep and narrow shaft. The rescuers were racing against the damn clock. It was a tough, grueling process to get these guys out of the mine. Some of the rescuers themselves were passing out, only adding more people to the list who needed to be saved. Which at this point was still a lot of damn people, over 20 of them. And by 5 p.m. that day, only 3 of the affected miners were able to be brought up to the surface alive. Then at 6 p.m., a mine inspector from the Laxey mine, G.J. Williams, arrives on the scene with intentions of exploring the mine to see what really happened down there. You know, to see why the hell miners are randomly dropping unconscious inside. He plans to explore all the way down to 100 fathoms. Keep in mind, men were dropping unconscious at just 60 fathoms. So yeah, ladies and boxheads, this was really risky. Williams and a group of volunteers head down into the shaft, slowly descending the ladder one by one until they reach the 74th fathom. Down there, the air is heavy, almost suffocating. But nope, that doesn't stop Williams from wanting to proceed further. He grabs one of the Laxey mine volunteers and together the pair descend the ladder even further. But before they reach 100 fathoms, Williams and the volunteer spot something odd. What's down there, Mr. Williams? Oh, it's nothing. Well, they just stumbled upon 3 of the missing miners. But this time, they weren't just unconscious with their bodies still draped over the ladder, they were dead. It seems the poor guys were trying to escape back up the ladder, but they just couldn't make it in time. Their bodies were too weak and too slow to make it back up. At the sight of the dead men, like you would imagine, Williams and the volunteer decide to ascend back up the ladder, not able to pass the bodies, blocking the rest of the way. Oh no, as the men climb, they feel the effects on their body become super intense. Each step of the ladder feels 100 times longer than normal. They're immediately out of breath, their bodies are weak, and it's really tough to move. But they push forward and barely reach the 60th fathom above. There, the rest of the group is struggling as well. The effects are really starting to take over. In their conditions, it wasn't going to be possible to ascend any further. But fear not, because Mine Inspector Williams has a little trick up his sleeve. Like literally. On his way to the mine, Williams had a little suspicion of what the cause of this madness may have been. So, he stopped at a store and bought a small bag of potassium chlorate, a white powdery substance. In the mine, Williams quickly grabbed a bunch of newspapers from his pocket, crumbled them up, and lit them on fire. Then, like a damn magician or something, he started sprinkling the white substance onto the flames below. The fire roared and lit up the whole area. "Get your faces in the smoke and take a damn breath," Williams desperately yelled to the rest of the group. Like you would imagine, without any question, all of the men followed his order. As they took in the smoke, they started to feel stronger, more awake, and more like themselves. Alright, let me get a little nerdy on you. Turns out that the powder, the potassium chlorate, actually emits oxygen when burned. So, the men received quite the burst of energy and now had the motivation to continue their ascension upwards. Phew, that was close. As the men climbed up the ladder, they kept their eyes peeled for any signs of life from the missing miners. It would have been a goddamn miracle if any of them had survived somewhere, but it wasn't entirely impossible just yet. But unfortunately, every man the group came across showed no signs of life. Just stiff, lifeless bodies that have been long dead. They called off the search and prepared to start again in the morning. Hold on. This time around, it was a body recovery process, so which means they weren't saving anyone anymore. Okay, and I know you're definitely wondering what the hell killed those guys in the first place. Well, let me explain. About 2 days before the incident, a group of miners were working at the bottom of the mine, around 130 fathoms, installing timber supports. You know, wood. And back then, like I explained earlier, they didn't really have any headlamps to provide light, which means they had to use candles to be able to see anything. And long story short, one of those miners left their candle burning in the mine shaft after they left. That very candle was left right next to a pile of timber. Woo! Yippee! So smart! Open flames next to a pile of wood. What could possibly go wrong? Over the weekend, the fire continued on, filling the bottom levels with smoke. And of course, filling the air with insane levels of carbon monoxide, a gas that is completely odorless and colorless. Pretty much a silent killer. The carbon monoxide levels were so bad at the bottom of the mine that they were 13 times higher than the amount needed to kill you in 1 hour. And for my non-nerds watching this video, it basically gave someone only 1 to 3 minutes to survive once exposed. Of course, the levels faded a bit as the smoke ascended upwards, but still left a lethal dose in the air. By the time they discovered the symptoms, it was far too late. In the end, the deadly gas would take the lives of 20 men from the Snæfell mine, despite the rescuers' best efforts. A terrible tragedy that could have easily been avoided if someone wasn't stupid enough to leave a candle burning underground. Listen, if you thought it couldn't get any worse underground, what if I told you there was a story where a scuba diver went to explore—
Dumbass nigga, man. Hey, W video, man.